Sentence fragments and run-on sentences. In this short lecture, we'll be discussing the avoidance of sentence fragments, both in the form of clauses and phrases. And we'll also discuss the meaning of run-on sentences and the 4 ways of revising them to a grammatically acceptable form. As a rule, don't treat a piece of a sentence as if it were a sentence, because when you do that, you create a fragment. To be a sentence, a word group, which is what another way of saying sentence, must consist of at least one full independent clause. It's a term we've used quite a bit in the last 2 lectures. Remember, just as a reminder, that an independent clause is a word group that consists of a subject and a predicate. Okay, and as a reminder here, here's an example. I played baseball. Very simple, right? But it's a complete sentence. It is an independent clause, which is used here as a complete sentence. It has a subject, I, and it has the predicate, played baseball. Now, when it comes to fragments, you can repair them in one of 2 ways. You can either pull the fragment into a nearby sentence, punctuating the new sentence correctly, or rewrite the fragment as a complete sentence. Let's take a closer look at these 2 possibilities with the occasions of fragmented clauses and fragmented phrases. And by the way, as a side note, keep in mind that when I'm referring to a fragmented sentence, I'm saying that at least one part of that sentence is incomplete and thus grammatically incorrect. Okay. Fragmented clauses, which are also referred to as subordinate clauses, are important to understand. So, better stated, a subordinate clause can cause a sentence fragment, can be the cause of that fragment. A subordinate clause is patterned like a sentence with both, it has a subject, it has a verb, but subordinate clauses begin with words that tell readers they can't stand alone. Words like after, although, because, before, if, so that, unless, until. There are a bunch of them. When, where. Okay, let's look at those that I just named. It fits perfectly on that slide. Okay, think about it. Could you create a simple sentence that starts with these words? Probably not. Let's take a look at this. We fear the Zika virus, period, because it is transmitted by the common mosquito. Can you spot the fragmented clause? Yep, it's the second part. It has a subject, it, and it has a predicate, okay, is transmitted, but it starts with the word because. And this is one of the words listed above, isn't it? That means that we have a problem here, a sentence fragment, and it needs fixing. We could do this in one of 2 ways. One, most fragmented clause is begged to be pulled into a nearby sentence. We do this by simply blending or merging the 2 so that now we have a single sentence that conveys the entire message that we want to convey. And it's grammatically correct. We fear the Zika virus because it's transmitted by the common mosquito. Easy peasy, just like that. As we see with this example, sometimes a fragmented clause can't be attached to a nearby sentence. Our fragmented clause here is the second part. Okay, uncontrolled development is taking a deadly toll on the environment, so that in many parts of the world, fragile ecosystems are collapsing. Here's our second part. That's the fragmented clause. It starts with this, so that. Well, we know that's not going to be a complete sentence, don't we? Notice that the opening words, so that, are seen in our list above. In these cases, the simplest way to turn a fragmented clause into a sentence is to delete the opening word or words that mark it as a subordinate. Now, unlike the previous example where we blended the two into one, we simply made two complete. We made two complete and grammatically correct sentences. Uncontrolled development is taking a deadly toll on the environment in many parts of the world. Fragile ecosystems are collapsing. That's two sentences now. Now, let's look at fragmented phrases. We just looked at fragmented clauses. Now, let's look at fragmented phrases. Like subordinate clauses, certain phrases are sometimes mistaken for sentences. The phrases, that is, they are fragments if they lack a subject, a verb, or both. Remember in our last slide, we looked at clauses which have a subject and a verb, but they're considered fragments when they start with certain words. Phrases are fragments if they lack a subject, a verb, or both. Let's look at this example. The archaeologists worked slowly, period, examining and labeling hundreds of pottery shards. The word group beginning with examining is a phrase, what we call a verbal phrase, and not a sentence. If you simply state the phrase out loud, this becomes clear. Examining and labeling hundreds of pottery shards. It's not a sentence. A lot of times a fragmented phrase may simply be pulled into a nearby sentence, like this. The archaeologists work slowly, comma, examining and labeling hundreds of pottery shards. Easy peasy, just like that. If the fragmented phrase can't be attached to a nearby sentence, as we just did, just turn the phrase into a sentence. You may need to add a subject or a verb or sometimes both. Here's an example. Jamie explained how to access the database, period. Also, how to submit reports and request vendor payments. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Especially the second part. But here's the remedy. Jamie explained how to access the database, period. She also taught us how to submit reports and request vendor payments. We simply made this into two sentences. I find that students are a lot of times confused about the differences between fragments and run-ons. And this is understandable since we're used to seeing graded and returned papers with the words fragment or run-on sentence without an explanation or maybe reminder of what exactly that means. A sentence fragment is exactly that, a fragmented or a partial sentence, seen in several examples in our last several slides. That is, it's a group of words that's intended to be a sentence, but it's missing something. It's fragmented. Run-on sentences are independent clauses that have not been joined correctly. Think of the term run-on as similar to rambles on. That is, it rambles from one part of the sentence to the next without the necessary connection or sometimes connections. An analogy would be like coming to a stop sign without stopping, just rolling right on through. That's dangerous, as we well know, and a run on is grammatically dangerous in that it threatens misinterpretation and misunderstanding. So there are two types of run on sentences. When a writer puts no mark of punctuation, no coordinating conjunction between independent clauses, the result of this is called a fused sentence. Here's an example. Air pollution poses risks to all humans. It can be deadly for people with asthma. Notice that it's a fused sentence in that we need something in between to unfuse it, right? To separate it. A far more common type of this type of sentence is a run-on sentence is the comma splice, which we see here. Two or more independent clauses joined with a comma, but without a coordinating conjunction. Air pollution poses risk to all humans, comma, it can be deadly for people with asthma. In some comma splices, the comma appears alone, like we see in this case. In other comma splices, the comma is accompanied by a joining word, such as however, and however is not a coordinating conjunction, right? Only the words for and nor, but, or, yet, and so are coordinating conjunctions. To correct a run-on sentence, you have four choices. First, use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Secondly, use a semicolon or, if appropriate, a colon or a dash. Thirdly, make the clauses into separate sentences. And then last, restructure the sentence, perhaps by subordinating one of the clauses. Okay, one way to correct a run-on sentence is to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Here's an example using the same sentence that we used in the last slide. Notice that we've included a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Another way to correct a run-on sentence is to use a semicolon, or if appropriate, a colon or a dash. Notice that we've simply used a semicolon between the two independent clauses. A third way to correct a run-on sentence is to make the clauses into separate sentences. Here we've simply placed a period at the end of the first clause and made the second clause into a second sentence. And then lastly, we can correct a run-on sentence by restructuring the sentence. In this case, we started with the introductory word group, although air pollution poses risk to all humans, and then we use a comma to separate the two independent clauses. Okay, let's quickly summarize what we've covered in this short lecture. Sentence fragments come in the form of either clauses or phrases, and the two repair methods that we discussed were to pull the fragment into a nearby sentence or to rewrite the fragment as a complete sentence. We learned that run-on sentences occur, and we're talking about the second part, run-on sentences that occur as a result of independent clauses that have not been joined correctly. And we talked about the four possible corrections. First, using a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Two, using a semicolon, a colon, or a dash. Three, by separating the independent clauses into sentences. And lastly, by restructuring the sentence. Hope this lecture has been helpful to you. Take care and God bless.